Have you ever thought, why would certain books get banned? Perhaps today, you'll see what got the censors all worked up. At the top of the list is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn remains one of the most challenged books in American schools, most frequently banned between 1966 and 1975. The controversy centers on Twain's use of the N-word and the portrayal of racial stereotypes. But also the deeper question, is this a racist novel or a searing critique of racism itself? Some districts have removed it entirely, while others keep it in the curriculum, but only with careful context and discussion, especially after a recent spike in challenges highlighted by PEN America. At the heart of the debate is Jim, the runaway slave. Early in the novel, Jim is a complex, empathetic character who pushes Huck to question the world he's inherited. But critics like Forrest G. Robinson point out that Jim's role shifts in the final chapters, where he becomes more submissive and less nuanced. Toni Morrison, in her introduction to the Oxford edition, argues that readers must confront Jim's humiliation and shame to fully grasp Twain's anti-racist intent. This uncomfortable honesty is exactly what has made the book a target for bans. Many fear the pain it might cause, while others believe that confronting that pain is the point. Not every banned book is about violence or rebellion, but sometimes a novel's challenge to social norms is enough to make people nervous. Fight Club. Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club is more than a story about secret brawls. It's a sharp critique of modern life that unsettled many parents and educators. The novel's raw depictions of violence, self-destruction, and its unflinching look at toxic masculinity and anti-consumerist rebellion quickly drew criticism. Some argue that the book's graphic scenes and dark philosophy were simply too much for teens, fueling calls for its removal from schools and libraries across the country. What makes Fight Club especially controversial is the fear that readers might misread its message. While Palahniuk intended to expose the emptiness left by materialism and rigid gender roles, critics worry that the novel's characters and their choices could be seen as a blueprint for reckless behavior. The intense fights and underground anarchy weren't meant to be admired, but the line between critique and endorsement isn't always clear for every reader. This tension between honest storytelling and the fear of negative influence sits at the heart of many censorship battles. Sometimes a book's willingness to reflect harsh realities is exactly what unsettles those who want to protect young readers. The Outsiders. S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders arrived as a direct, unfiltered look at teenage life, and its realism quickly led to controversy. The novel's honest depiction of gang violence, underage drinking, and troubled families unsettled many parents and educators. Community groups in various school districts challenged the book, arguing that exposing teens to greaser-social conflicts might glamorize violence or encourage negative behavior. The use of slang and everyday language, along with the portrayal of fractured home lives, added to the concerns about whether the book was suitable for young readers. Critics also worried that the novel's focus on social class divisions and alienation might paint too bleak a picture of society or oversimplify real issues. Some felt that the struggles of Ponyboy and his friends could be seen as encouraging rebellion or undermining traditional values. Despite these objections, The Outsiders is often praised for giving a voice to marginalized youth and for fostering empathy among its readers. Author Hinton's honest storytelling helped generations of teens see themselves in literature, challenging assumptions about identity and belonging. Not every book that faces backlash is explicit in its content, but sometimes the raw truth of a character's journey is enough to spark debate. The Color Purple. Alice Walker's The Color Purple stands as one of the most challenged books in America, ranked number 17 on the American Library Association's Top 100 Most Challenged list. The novel's candid treatment of sexual abuse, violence, and offensive language, including repeated use of the N-word, has made it a lightning rod for controversy in schools and libraries. Critics often point to Seeley's letters, describing the abuse she endures from her father as especially troubling. The book's use of explicit language and depiction of body parts have drawn formal complaints from parents and educators who argue that such content is inappropriate for young readers. Another source of objection is the portrayal of Seeley's relationship with Shug Avery. Scenes that explore same-sex intimacy have led some to call the novel unsuitable for teenagers, especially when paired with its discussion of sexual identity and trauma. The violence in scenes like Sophia's punch at Harpo's and the realities of Seeley's world have also raised concerns about the book's impact on young audiences. Yet, the story's power lies in its honesty and the way it transforms pain into resilience. Walker's writing encourages readers to face difficult truths, opening conversations about identity, survival, and the strength to find one's voice, even when that voice is misunderstood or feared. The Catcher in the Rye. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye has long been seen as a threat by parents, teachers, and school boards, mostly because of Holden Caulfield's voice. His blunt language, open contempt for authority, and struggle with alienation unsettled adults when the novel appeared in classrooms. From 1966 to 1975, it was the most frequently banned book in American schools. Critics argue that Holden's attitude and the novel's frank talk about sex and mental health might lead young readers astray, rather than help them work through similar feelings. One of the most notable protests came during a 1976 legislative hearing in Oklahoma City, where a local censorship group parked a smutmobile outside to sway the decision. They pressured a bookseller to stop carrying the book, calling it filthy and profane. In New Jersey, parents labeled the novel explicitly pornographic and immoral, prompting the school board to restrict it to advanced placement students only, with an option for parents to opt their children out. In other places, like a small Washington town, the book was even accused of being part of a communist plot and banned outright. The anxiety around The Catcher in the Rye only deepened after Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon, was found carrying the book and quoted from it at his sentencing. This real-world connection fueled the belief that Salinger's novel could inspire dangerous behavior, adding another layer to the debate over what stories are too provocative for young readers. Native Son. Richard Wright's Native Son challenged readers with his unfiltered look at the life of Bigger Thomas, a young black man whose desperate actions exposed the brutality of a racist system. The novel's graphic violence and frank exploration of sexuality became flashpoints for controversy, especially in schools. In California, Native Son was officially banned for its violent and sexual content, with parents and school officials worried that such realism would be disturbing or harmful to students. The debate centered on whether confronting harsh truths in literature educates or unsettles young readers. Wright's attention to environmental racism, unsafe housing, rodent infestations, and the daily indignities Bigger's family faces added to the discomfort. These vivid details made the story feel immediate and inescapable, prompting some parents to argue that the book's portrayal of poverty and oppression was too much for classrooms. Yet, Wright's goal was never to glorify violence, but to force a confrontation with the consequences of prejudice and neglect. The controversy over Native Son reveals just how uneasy people can become when a novel refuses to soften reality. Sometimes it's the raw honesty of a story that sparks the strongest reaction. Oh, and by the way, what did you think of the 2019 movie adaptation of Native Son? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Slaughterhouse-Five. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five has faced repeated bans for its stark portrayal of war and its unconventional style. The novel's graphic violence, profanity, and anti-war message drew strong objections from parents, educators, and religious groups. Parents of New York United, in particular, labeled it anti-Christian, unpatriotic, and just plain filthy. Set during the firebombing of Dresden, a catastrophe Vonnegut survived as a prisoner of war, the book's unfiltered look at trauma and destruction challenged the sanitized versions of history that some preferred for classrooms. The controversy reached a peak in the 1970s when the Island Trees Board of Education in New York removed Slaughterhouse-Five from school libraries, sparking the Supreme Court case, Pico v. Board of Education. The court split 4-4 on the merits, but ruled that school boards could not remove books simply because they disagreed with their ideas, setting a landmark precedent for intellectual freedom. This decision underscored the tension between protecting young readers and allowing access to stories that question accepted truths. Vonnegut's intent was not to shock for its own sake, but to force readers to face the real cost of war, something he knew firsthand. The backlash against Slaughterhouse-Five shows how a novel's willingness to challenge comfortable beliefs can make it a target, especially when it asks hard questions about humanity's choices. Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein unsettled readers from its very first publication, not only for the monster's appearance, but for the challenge it posed to religious and moral beliefs. Early 19th century critics saw Victor Frankenstein's act of creating life through science as an abomination, a direct challenge to the idea that only God could give life. This fear of playing God led religious groups to condemn the novel, and many schools and libraries later banned it for its graphic violence and its willingness to question the boundaries of scientific ambition. One scene in particular, the monstrous strangling of young William Frankenstein, sparked outrage for its inhumane portrayal of child death. Parents and educators argued that the graphic nature of this moment was too disturbing for young readers and could encourage immoral thoughts. The novel's vivid descriptions of the creature's grotesque features and its exploration of what it means to be human only added to the discomfort, as Shelley forced readers to confront the consequences of unchecked ambition and the limits of human understanding. Frankenstein's history of censorship shows how stories that push against the limits of comfort and tradition often face the harshest scrutiny. When people try to ban a book, it's often because the story makes them uncomfortable or challenges what they believe. These books were not removed for poor writing. They were challenged because they forced tough questions and exposed truths some would rather avoid. But shutting out these voices does not solve the problems inside their pages. It just keeps us from facing them. Which of these books did you read in school? I was assigned Catcher in the Rye and Native Son. Native Son now being one of my favorite books. Share your own story below. And if you want to talk more about controversial literature, subscribe to Let Me Explain. Thank you.